I never really got to know my paternal grandfather. It's okay. I ended up with two absolutely fantastic grandfathers on my mom's side as a result of my grandmother remarrying. I can't say that I missed my paternal grandfather, and by all accounts, there wasn't much to miss. I remember being in my early 20s, and an older gentleman was standing behind me in the checkout at the local Safeway. He heard the checker address me as Mr. Kennedy and asked if I knew Old Tom. I almost told him that I didn't, until a flash reminded me that it was my grandfather. We talked for about 5 minutes outside the Safeway. He struggled not to speak ill of the dead. I wanted to tell him it was okay. There was very little he could tell me that would surprise me. I only have two memories of him when he was alive. The first was an Independence Day celebration. I don't remember exactly how old I was. I'm pretty sure I was under 7. I was playing with a kid I had never met and would never see again at the local festivities. He had candy cigarettes and bubblegum cigars. Both sides of my family were pretty down on tobacco, and I had no idea why people would get that kind of candy for their kids. Still, it was candy, and I wasn't about to turn down candy. Then I noticed my father talking to someone. It looked deep and serious, the kind of conversation I knew better than to interrupt. A few minutes later, my dad came to me and introduced me very briefly to this man. He said it was my grandfather. I didn't want to challenge my dad in front of this stranger, but I knew this wasn't Grandpa Allen or Grandpa Francis. It wasn't my great-grandpa Don, and great-grandpa Clifton was dead. I wasn't sure who that left. When I asked my dad about it later, he explained that it was his father. That was the day that I realized that I had two grandfathers on my mom's side, and that this was a bit strange. The other memory was when I was 13. We went to an old tractor show. My dad was beside himself looking at the old equipment. There was a blacksmith shop that kept me entertained most of the day, and a booth with a whole bunch of old McDonald's Happy Meal toys when the blacksmith took his breaks. Then my dad took me and my brother to meet one of the founders of the tractor show, his father, Tom Kennedy. We said hello, shook hands uncomfortably. Then, as soon as the stranger was making excuses to get out of there, I was eager to get back to the blacksmith shop. The next fall, my grandfather was murdered. Any chance to get to know him was forever lost. I went through a brief period in my later 20s and early 30s that I wished I had access to him. I've struggled with emotional regulation my whole life. Tom Kennedy tore his family apart through his anger and drinking and getting into fights at bars. I wondered if he could give some insights that would help me. Then I discovered that I have a vitamin deficiency. 1,500 milligrams of slow-release niacin every day, and I am a much more pleasant individual. My grandfather obviously never discovered that about himself, and there's no way to know if my problem was his problem. In either case, he probably had no wisdom to offer. Still, it would have been nice to hear that from the man himself, but I was robbed of that opportunity. The man that killed my grandfather was tempted to fight the charges. The evidence was overwhelming, but what did he have to lose? Maybe his lawyer could find a technicality and get all the evidence thrown out. Then the prosecutor decided to go for the death penalty. That was when the plea bargaining began. Every time he's up for parole, my family gets a letter and is given a chance to contest it. Along with a letter from the prison, we also often get a letter from the man. I read the last one. He decided at the last minute not to seek parole. It was a change of heart based on a conversation with his minister. My grandfather struggled to find peace in this life. I hope that he will find the peace in the next life that evaded him in this life. From the letter we got and what I've heard, the man that killed him has also struggled to find peace in this life. I similarly hope that he can find peace in the next life if he never finds it here. I think of myself as a hopeful universalist, There's no one actual person that you can point me to and I will say that I know for sure that I want them to end up in hell for eternity. Even so, the scriptural and philosophical arguments in favor of hell being necessary are compelling enough to me that I doubt hell will actually be empty. If my grandfather's murderer is going to find peace in this life, I'm glad he wasn't executed. He's dangerous, and I don't think we will ever have the kind of certainty it would take to release him into society. My grandfather wasn't his first violent act, and may not even have been his first murder. He's been denied parole a few times because he was involved in violence inside the prison that could have been fatal to others. It would take more than his say-so to convince me that he's all better and ready for society, and he's lost so much trust that it's even hard to find a safe way to test him to see if he's become trustworthy yet. Despite all that, if he can find peace in this life, I want that for him. It's better for all of society if we all remain open to helping each other find peace, truth, and community, no matter what they've done. It's also worth thinking about all the people for whom new technology or procedures have ultimately proven to be innocent. In some cases, we've found this out before the execution. In other cases, we don't find out until after they're dead. Then, there's Genesis 9 verse 6. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. Corrected King James Version, the 4. And this is something I still believe very strongly. We are all made in the image of God. Yet there are interesting, compelling exceptions to this command. Cain killed his brother in cold blood out of jealousy, yet went free. Genesis 4. Israel established cities of refuge for those who had committed manslaughter. Numbers 35:22-28. So even in Scripture, it's not as hard and fast as all that. God's heart seems bent towards reconciliation, even if there are practical concerns like the safety of the people and the attack on the image of God. There's a point of difference between slaying and manslaughter. Just to set a dichotomy, when a manslaughterer kills another human, there's a sense in which the person is not the target, he's just collateral damage. The manslaughter was not the goal. It was criminally careless action or inaction that resulted in the death of another person. The example in Numbers 35:23 works well. Someone is out laying stones for a building or road or whatever and toss some over a hill, then walk over and see that they've killed some guy that they've never met. Should he have checked to make sure there wasn't someone there before throwing rocks there? Absolutely. Did he wake up that morning saying, "I hope someone dies today"? Absolutely not. When they slay someone, it's different. Then they really do wake up saying, "I hope this person dies today, and here's how I'm going to go about helping to ensure that this happens." Even within slaying someone, there are still two categories. There is what for these purposes I will call homicide and murder. These aren't used as legal terms. I just need words to make the distinctions I'm talking about. In a homicide, killing someone was the intent, but it's because they failed to see the image of God in them. In a murder, killing someone was the intent, and it's because they saw the image of God in them. For example, if someone was breaking into a home repeatedly in order to protect their family and or possession, the homeowner might lay in wait and respond with deadly force. They see the intruder as dangerous, chaotic, and wrong. They don't want to kill another person, but this person is a threat. That's a homicide. It might be justified, or it might not, and we will come back to that. In sharp contrast is the person who sees a debt collector coming. There's a lot to say about the culture of debt manufacturing as a means to power, which will have to wait for another day. But laying all that to one side for now, the debt collector either is or directly represents someone that helped at one point. The indebted needed them at one point. Now that it's time to pay back, the indebted wants to find a way out at any cost. They lay in wait and slay their debt collector. Even though this might be a moment of fear or anger analogous to the home invader, what is it that they fear? They fear someone who is trying to do right by their own family, someone who previously did right by the indebted, someone who seeks to be helped by someone they previously helped. What's more, the indebted doesn't act any differently when they are owed a debt. When they show up at a friend's doorstep and get turned away, they're just as quick to list off the dozens of times they've helped their friend and point out that it's time to give back. And if that friend doesn't, they break the friendship and walk away. And it's the right thing to do, because that friend is just using them. But now that it's revealed that they were just using their debt collector, they murder him. Those of us that live in a post-industrial world have no reason to commit homicide unless we are under direct attack. Police exist for the express purpose of protecting us, among other things. That is, unfortunately, why we need police. There are still people out there who lose sight of the fact that we are all made in God's image. A law without a punishment is really just a suggestion. The suggestion that they not break into their neighbor's house when they're cold, that they not take their neighbor's food when they're hungry, and that they not kill their neighbor when the neighbor tries to resist just isn't a compelling suggestion to some people. When you add, "or you'll go to jail where you're locked down full time," it still isn't compelling to some people. And these people are a danger to their neighbors. Have you ever wondered why we're able to afford police? It hasn't always been the case. In ancient times, only the fairly wealthy could afford to have guards for their lands and families. As societies would form, one thing that is pretty universal is that the more people you have, the more excess time you have. This is straightforward algebra. If each farmer can produce enough food to feed 3 people in an average year, and there are rolling famines every 7-ish years, then a society of 300 needs pretty much everyone farming, or the next famine will be really bad. But a society of 3,000 can afford to have a small cohort of military officers and administrators and entertainers dedicated to other things. The urban societies of ancient Egypt and Roman created police forces that were extensions of the military. They could be called into service when needed for either function. Agricultural societies didn't have the spare manpower for these forces, though. If someone was going to be detained long term, it was at the personal expense of the one detaining them. And even the urban cultures didn't have the kind of leisure among the masses that we enjoy today. The vast majority of the pre-industrial workforce was engaged in food production or distribution. A person sitting in prison was both not producing anything and consuming. Not only the person detained, but also the people detaining them. When a famine did hit, it was less impactful on an urban society than an agricultural society, but only because they kept the vast majority of the population working most of the time. In this kind of world, it's easy to see why the ancient world needed execution. The ancients were facing a difficult choice. That meal that you feed to that murderer might be the meal you need when the next rolling famine comes along. The price of food is a matter of supply and demand, and we can kind of plot this in economic terms. When the famine hits, the price of food goes up. How steeply it goes up will depend on how much food is in the stores. In a pre-industrial society, there's maybe 2 years' worth of stores. The price of food will climb very sharply. Feeding a non-productive murderer is going to cause that to climb even faster. They'll watch young children die because they run out of food in the stores. That store would have lasted longer if they just didn't feed so many murderers. They knew that there were going to be a small number of innocent people who ended up executed, but there were going to be a lot more innocent children that starved. That's why prisoners that could be rehabilitated in the ancient world were put to work by their jailers. As productive prisoners, there was less danger of them eating food that would later save another. The Industrial Revolution changed everything, though. Food production started to employ so many fewer people that it disrupted the economics of the developing world for centuries. Some people think we're still trying to sort out what to do with the excess population. On the one hand, now we can afford police. On the other hand, sometimes they're the problem rather than the solution. As much as we complain about the price of food at the grocery store, the number of people that are leaving their 9-to-5 job to farm at home because it's less work for more production is vanishingly rare. Without getting into the discussion of how to fix it or who should fix it, starvation in the industrial world is the result of human factors, not rolling famines. What that means, in hyperbolic terms, is that in the ancient world, feeding and housing the convicted but possibly innocent meant that the price of a meal's worth of vegetables would triple in price at the next rolling famine. Executing them meant that the price of those same vegetables only go up by half. In the modern industrial world, feeding and housing all of these potentially innocent victims causes our morning coffee to go up by 10 cents. I can respect the ancient emperor looking down at his people and saying, "I'm pretty sure he's guilty of murder, but I could be wrong. If I don't kill him and those like him, though, I could find myself watching children die in the next famine. One innocent might die today, but if I don't uphold these policies, many innocents will die at the next famine. I wish it could be different." It's much harder to respect the modern voter that is saying, "I'm pretty sure most of the people this policy will kill are going to be innocent, but there are going to be a few innocent people that die for it. Unfortunately, the alternative is that I pay 10 cents more for my morning coffee, so those innocent people are just going to have to accept that I'm sorry." I would love to see someone that enjoys economics actually run the numbers for both the pre-industrial world and the modern world about how housing these people actually impacts our economy. For simplicity, ignore the legal, just stick to housing and food for the criminal and the guards. If we were to return to an attitude of either execution or employment for all our criminals, what would that do to the economy? Let me know in the comments of my blog if you're aware of such an evaluation. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to hope that our world can find better and better ways to help those who have been convicted. If they're innocent, I hope we can find them justice and set them free. If they're guilty, I hope we can help them to find peace and truth and stability in this life. If our efforts to that end fail, I hope they will find peace in the next world.